Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session, which is on adapting and leading in the COVID-19 reality. I'll get to introducing the panelists today, but prior to that, I'll just add a little bit of a background for the session. As we're all aware, COVID-19 continues to impact all aspects of the new product development pathway, from preclinical research to clinical trial management and product manufacturing. Most CRO and CMO organizations have had to adapt in real time to the opportunities and risks that have presented themselves with this new reality. And today we're going to speak with some experts in the field as to how they've had to kind of duck and weave and pivot to help out in where we are today. My name is Jamie Hennessy. I'll be the moderator for the session today. I'm the co-founder and CFO of Biotech Exec, along with my business partner, Russell Allen, who most of you will know. And today we have Chuck Fogelgren, VP and General Manager from Quest Diagnostics, Marta New, CEO and founder of Radius Research, and Richard Sidwell, Chief VP and Scientific Officer at Recro Gainesville. So I will actually pass it over to each of our panelists to give a little larger introduction to their background, cover what exactly it is that their organization does and their role within it, and then we'll get into some COVID-19 specifics. So Chuck, do you mind if I start with you?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Jamie. Good to see everybody today virtually. This is our new reality, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. I work for Quest Diagnostics. Quest is the largest diagnostics company in the world, headquartered in northern New Jersey. And I've been with Quest for about 3 years since they acquired Medfusion. And prior to that, I've been involved in clinical development and preclinical development for about 20 years. Good to be here and join this panel for this discussion. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Chuck. Richard?
Sure. Hi, I'm Richard Sidwell. I'm Senior Vice President and Chief Scientific Officer for Recro. And Recro is a contract development and manufacturing organization located mostly in Gainesville, Georgia. That's where we have our development manufacturing plants. So what we do is formulation development, clinical supply manufacture, commercial manufacturing of solid oral dosage forms. So really all of the CMC development of activities in getting pharmaceuticals to market. I've been with the organization in Gainesville for 17 years, though we've only had the Recro name for about 5. And I've been in the industry for a little over 25.
Perfect. Thank you. Last but not least.
Hey guys, I'm Marta New. Thanks, Jamie. And thank you for inviting me to be on the panel. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces. I am with Radius Research. We're Atlanta-based preclinical CRO, and we focus on therapeutics, mostly in oncology, immunology, infectious diseases, some metabolic, and CNS. So we work with earlier stage clients that have promising new drugs and are looking for a really well integrated CRO. So that's where we come in. Our team consists of folks who come from pharma R&D and product development and early stage investing. That's what I did previous to starting Radius. So if any of the folks on this panel or listening have any preclinical drugs and need help, they should call me afterwards. So good to be here.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you each. And Marta, maybe I'll start with you. This is the $64,000 question here, and what's changed in the past 10 months in your world, but how the focus has shifted from what was our regular day-to-day job to helping or being involved in COVID in any way, shape, or form. So I'll go down the panel, but Marta, let's start with you, just with any kind of direct experience of how that day-to-day has changed.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. And I think that's a key question, is how the focus of research in the States has been shifting. And I'm sure that Richard and Chuck will touch on the clinical aspect, but what we're seeing in the world of preclinical drug development specifically is that there's a lot of funding coming in from Congress, over 10 billion approved over the past 8 to 10 months to support preclinical research in the area of COVID. And so the government has been pretty well organized given the short timelines and quite motivated to distribute such large funds to preclinical researchers. And they had formed numerous initiatives, organizations, and I think CTAP, the Coronavirus Treatment Acceleration Program, is leading the way. And what this orchestrated movement of funding and supporting research in COVID is doing, on the positive side, it has reinvigorated the infectious diseases research, which is great. It's almost giving a new boost and a positive PR to biotech. We had historically struggled with that, as you know. And overall has created a lot of optimism in repurposing some of the existing drugs for COVID. On the flip side, what this surge of funding and interest in COVID research has done that we're seeing on the preclinical side is that there are, according to CTAP, over 550 pre-IND drugs that are being pursued for COVID. So pre-IND, and over 350 approved INDs and getting ready to go into clinic. And what this has created is a lot of competition that's going to impact how our market and competitive advantages will look 6 months or 12 months down the road for some of the smaller companies that have now maybe gotten some of the SBIR, STTR grants, or some of the researchers that have gotten new R01s in COVID. So one thing to think about. The second one, it's what's creating, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, are operating inefficiencies and bottlenecks, especially in non-human primate research, because for effective preclinical work, monkeys are required, and we have nationwide shortage of monkeys. And lastly, what we're seeing for Radius, what's impactful, is that we're getting potential clients who are now shifting from their core research in oncology or immunology into COVID, and they don't have internal expertise. They don't have access to the right networks. They don't have access to the right models. They might have gotten some cash through these plentiful funds, but in terms of the efficiency of actually executing and delivering high quality product that's going to be competing with these thousands of potential other entrants is going to be a challenge. So those are some of the trends that we're seeing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that we'll touch on that as we go through this, is to not only the kind of advocacy behind the COVID-19 response and how that has been largely seen across the board, but what that's done to the non-COVID-19 drug pipeline, because those diseases haven't stopped either. So that's interesting. And you brought up a good point around PR. I think everybody listening and on the call, when you meet someone new and you tell them what field that you work in, the response that you receive this year is dramatically better than it has been in the past few. So Richard, maybe we'll turn over to you. I know that COVID-19 itself has impacted the supply chain a little at Recro, but would you be able to share your thoughts on kind of what's changed operationally and some of those problem areas?
Sure. So it's the what and the why that we do hasn't changed. It's the how that has changed sort of significantly, right? So you touched on supply chain. We all know about toilet paper and sanitizer early in the year, but especially, China and Northern Italy are centers for API manufacture in a lot of ways. So that has impacted supply chain for contract development and manufacturing as well on that front. especially early in the year. So there was a lot of activity in trying to shore up risks and uncertainties around supply chain. But then the other side of things is where things have changed is the focus. As Marta sort of mentioned, there's been this huge surge of focus on COVID activities, which has necessarily created bottlenecks for other kinds of therapies, particularly on the clinical end of things. So where we sit as a CDMO, we're kind of in between. So we're trying to get the supplies that we need to move things forward. And then very frequently our customers have run into either slowdowns or difficulties getting access to beds for clinical studies that they wanted to pursue. So there has been a bit of a slowdown on that front, that which is certainly getting better at this point. I think everybody has realized this isn't a 2 or 3 month effort now. We have to adapt instead of hunkering down and waiting it out. So really it has shifted the focus to, okay, this is the new reality. It's not going to change for some time. How do we keep moving forward and keep the progress going? I think we have seen a number of our clients have gotten into COVID related activities where either they're repurposing or they're prioritizing projects that are sort of anti-infective in nature. But everybody's still trying to keep their projects moving forward in spite of the new reality. I'm sure we'll talk some more about that.
Yes, absolutely. And maybe touching on the clinical trial impacts and how you conduct that in today's world. Chuck, would you care to share your thoughts on what's changed for you over the past 10, 11 months?
Absolutely. Yeah, I thought I didn't quite mention that in the introductions that at Quest, I actually lead the clinical trials business there. So that's the reference. So we support both IVD and biopharma trials. And there's really been an interesting dynamic for both trial types. On the biopharma side, to build on what Richard was just mentioning, the number of clinical sites that are open and how they handle patients, frankly, has changed dramatically, decreasing overall capacity, which has forced a transition to virtual trials, which has been a discussion point for probably going on 20 years, but there's not really been a lot of progress, depending on who you ask. But this has really forced the issue and really forced the concept of using mobile phlebotomy on a more regular basis to do your clinical collections and managing patients remotely. And I think most of us have also seen the use of services like Teladoc. That is becoming more acceptable and was not as acceptable as the government made some exceptions for that use in a more broad fashion than was previously allowed. So that's been really, really fascinating to see that change and the dramatic change. The volume of requests of that sort has been very, very high. The other piece that is related to mobile phlebotomy, but a little bit different. If you think about Quest Diagnostics, we have patient service centers all over the country, 2,400 service centers. Some of them in Walmart or Safeways. Safeway may not be as convenient in the Atlanta area, but Walmart certainly, where folks can go in. There's been a lot of interest in leveraging those facilities for patient visits for specific blood draws that would support a clinical trial. So that's been interesting. On the diagnostic side, I'd say we've seen a lot more collaboration on innovation and bringing new products to market than we might have seen previously. I'd say historically there's a bit more of a vendor and buyer relationship, and through COVID there's been a lot more collaboration, necessarily so, I think, supported by many of the initiatives Marta referred to, where it's really been an all hands on deck approach that the federal government has strongly encouraged and incented with a significant amount of resources to help us get to a better place. So I think that's really been interesting to see. And then ultimately that has accelerated diagnostic innovation and the number of products that have been brought to market and how they're being brought to market. One of our more recent projects company-wide is looking at how we can deliver at-home collection kits for COVID And there are a few projects, 2 sites in the US where we're actually delivering these by drone, which is an interesting concept, and we'll see how that evolves and develops.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I remember when we discussed this last week, you mentioned this drone delivery concept of COVID trials. That it just blows my mind. That's where we are with technology today. And another thing you mentioned about kind of the virtual clinical trial model having been in discussions, or at least having been planned out as viable for 20 years. I don't think that's industry specific, right? That's working from home in corporate America. That's always been said, oh, we can do it. And it's never really had the opportunity to prove itself. And you will always have previously had that person that says, no, you don't get the collaboration, you don't get the work. How do you know your people are logging on? How do you know they're actually not just watching Netflix? And that's kind of had to it's turned on its head because it's had to.
Right.
So that's great. Thank you for that background from each of you. We've touched a little bit on this, but maybe I'll just ask each of you to add color where you see fit. And this is really on the operational change to your businesses. What have you had to change just to continue to do your work? So Richard, I might start with you. I know that it's difficult when you've got lab space and technicians and work that needs to be processed in the lab, yet we have government mandates that say everybody should work from home, and people don't have lab setups in the basement. So how's your company kind of traversed that issue where some are presumably working from home, but some there's just a requirement to be in the lab to get the work done?
Yeah, well, first, I guess we sort of hope that they don't have lab setups in their basements generally. That'd probably be not good. But you're right. We manufacture product, right? We manufacture commercial supplies, we manufacture clinical supplies, and we have to do testing. And that means we have to be in the building with the product and the equipment to do that. I think the bright side of that is all of the people who work hands-on with product, whether it be testing or in manufacturing, we have a policy and we have a history and culture already of cross-contamination control. So we've forever, it's a standard thing that if you're sick, you don't go to work in the manufacturing space, because we don't want to risk contaminating our product with anything, nor our other people. So the COVID pandemic has just reinforced that behavior that we already had established. So we've increased our cleaning, we've increased our separation of those people in terms of shared spaces and things like that. Very often our operators are wearing respirators and gloves and face shields and things anyway. So in that regard, we haven't changed a tremendous amount. What we have done, though, is that most of the support personnel in our company have started working remotely. And really since probably second week of March, I would say about half of our employees have been working remotely, myself included. So we have proven out that, yes, you can do things on Zoom. Yes, you can do things over Microsoft Teams or Skype or telephone, and it can work. Have we had to adapt? Yeah, sure we have. I think there were still a number of sort of legacy systems that required paper and ink sign-offs for things in our organization that we had to rapidly switch over to electronic to make everything work as it should. But that really has worked out well. And I know you mentioned, you touched on that. Well, how do we know everybody is working? How do we know everybody's going to be doing things? That's one thing I'll say, especially for our company anyway, is that it was not a concern. The work is getting done, and the people have really pulled together and adapted remarkably well to the new way of doing things. So I think the how has just shifted. Everything that can be done remotely, we've shifted to doing remotely. For those things where we can't do it remotely, we've just increased the already existing risk assessment and safety procedures that we already had. I guess the other thing is supply chain wise, we did have to increase safety stock and find additional suppliers of things, especially in the early days of the pandemic. There were supply shortages of masks and gloves and coveralls and things like that, sanitizer and cleaning agents. So we did have to scramble a little bit on the supply chain side in the early days, but I think the industry in general has adapted and things are flowing smoothly now.
Yeah, you had everybody and their dog trying to take the face masks from you
Yeah.
as a preventative measure. Marta or Chuck, any thoughts there? Or then maybe we'll move slightly towards customer focus next. But Marta, you did mention that you've experienced a shortage, or there is a shortage in the system for primates in a preclinical setting. Have either of you experienced any just lab space shortage, given that it feels like there's been a huge influx of demand for testing, both either on the diagnostic side or just in the lab trying to understand and develop a treatment here, and that didn't exist a year ago. So common sense is telling me that there's been an influx and there is an unlimited lab space out there. So either of you care to touch on that, along with any operational changes either of you had to kind of oversee?
Sure, I can talk, or Marta, if you'd like to cover preclinical first.
I'll go ahead. Yes, Jamie, you remember correctly. So Radius is a virtual preclinical CRO, and the COVID situation just validated our model in the sense that it is possible to run a preclinical CRO through subcontracting in a network of partnering labs. And so that has been the model from the get-go. What we are seeing on the back end, given that we have access to a large number of labs nationwide, some of them that are core facilities at universities, some of them that are existing CROs, for profit or non-for-profit. What we have done as the aftermath of the university closures in March, April, and May, we shifted some of the subcontracting work from core labs, core facilities, into the for-profit CROs that were open throughout this. And they were actually looking for projects because they saw a short dip in the demand. So given, again, that our model is virtual, it's just like playing Tetris in the background, trying to find the right resource that is open, that has implemented, to Richard's point, new systems and measures to combat some of the COVID requirements, and then we can reroute the work through those labs. And again, what we're seeing is a combination of COVID focused versus non-COVID focused, and labs that focus on non-COVID focused work, which is bulk of what we do as well. They have a lot of capacity in the system. So we are not seeing any detrimental shortages and capacities. Yeah.
Thank you. Chuck,
yeah, sure. So I was going to comment. So Quest, we've seen some really interesting things. So similar to what Richard described at Recro in terms of operations, as a diagnostic lab, we needed to keep operating and to continue to operate. Initially, there was pretty significant drop in overall clinical volumes. So the number of patients going to the hospital or their physician offices, for example, really dropped, and it took a pretty hit, I think, industry-wide on the diagnostic industry. And there are some recent data and publications that we've released. One of them showed, in some cases, a 50% reduction in cancer diagnoses. And so that's what I think we should all realize is that's not saying that there are 50% fewer cancer cases. It's that the cases are not being diagnosed as early as they would have been otherwise, and will likely be diagnosed later at some point, which is a concern for anyone, but certainly, and most importantly, that patient and their family. So those volume drops, I think, were pretty significant. On the other side of things, there was also, as we may recall, an exceptional amount of pressure on the diagnostic industry to bring diagnostic testing up rapidly, and at the time with very limited out-of-the-box kits. There weren't coronavirus test kits available immediately. as you go back and look at the history, the CDC had really started the development of these kits, and ultimately the entire industry got involved with all the big players driving the kit development. And initially, we started out with bringing up a lab-developed test at one of our esoteric sites in San Juan Capistrano, California. Capacity was about 5,000 patient samples a day. I think now we're pushing north of 220,000 samples a day that we were processing throughout our network on the diagnostic tests, and a couple 100,000 on the antibody side to test folks who have been exposed and want some confirmation of that exposure. So in any event, that amount of pressure has really driven that innovation that I mentioned earlier, bringing those different products to market effectively on such short notice to meet the demand, really to help keep society safe and keep the economy rolling has really been, I think, a driver for innovation, different type of innovation than we've seen historically.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's shift gears slightly to your customers. And have you got any success stories, horror stories on their ability to transform and change to a virtual model, and how that's impacted their own ability to move at the preclinical side, something through the chain here, or have you got some customers that just are kind of refusing to accept that this is a new normal, and they're not advancing any of their virtual methodologies, and you kind of see them struggling?
That to me, Jamie?
Yeah, let's start with you, Chuck, and I'll ask Richard to go next.
So I would say that early days of the pandemic, everybody was exceptionally conservative and in a cash conservation mode, and hunker down, and hopefully we'll see the end of this in tomorrow or next week. And I think as we mentioned earlier, this is going to be around for a good bit still, and that, I think, reality hit, I would say, June-ish timeframe, and you started to see everybody really open up. And I think that was in part facilitated by some of the programs that the government initiated that Marta mentioned previously, which is good. It sort of helps everybody get back to, okay, there's a mission and a task to accomplish here for the greater good. And it was great to see the entire industry mobilize around that. So I'd say by and large, everybody has, most every company I've seen and been working with has adapted to that. I'd say that at the same time, most of our customers, and ourselves included, are a voluntary return to office, not return to work. Everybody's been working, in our case, much more than they were pre-COVID, but everybody's returning to office voluntarily through the end of the year at a minimum, and likely for some folks through, some part of next year. And there have been public announcements for some of the tech companies, never come back to work to the office. Thanks. Just work from wherever you are on a beach in, the South Pacific, wherever is good. So that's been a really interesting change to see. And I think more companies have yet to make that decision, and it'll be interesting to see how those decisions come out.
Great. And Richard, have you seen any of your customers really not be able to move forward clinically just because they're not willing to kind of adapt, or has everybody's realized that they don't have a choice and that they've had to adapt?
I think it's not quite a question of being willing to adapt in most cases. I think everybody has been willing to adapt. It's the question is more around what are they working on, and are the roadblocks too high or not? So I think our customers tend to be small to medium-sized clinical phase pharmaceutical companies. And in a lot of cases, the people that we're specifically working with have been working remotely for a long time. Very often there's a number of consultants on the team who are remote workers by choice and career for ages now. So in that sense, a lot of the people that we work with directly with our customers haven't had to adapt in that sense. They're working from their home offices or from the road as always. Where it's been a little different though is in cases where there's a COVID opportunity for our customers, everything has ramped up rapidly, right? So they've suddenly become extremely flexible, extremely urgent, focused on moving things forward. Some of the other ones where they're perhaps in investment phase, where they're looking for investment to support their clinical phase work, that became difficult early in the year, where investors kind of put their hands deep in their pockets, trying to wait to see what was going to happen. For the medium-sized companies that can weather that with their revenues or their cash reserves, no problem. For the very small companies, that was a very big challenge for some of them. So we did see a couple of companies essentially roll up their carpets and put themselves on the shelf until they can see a better investment climate for the kind of therapies that they're working on, which particularly non-COVID, because obviously COVID's getting a ton of investment right now. So it varies, right? So there's the companies that can weather the storm and they're trying to move forward and they're adapting and they're doing that well. There's the small companies that ran into roadblocks, and then there's the other small companies that have a COVID opportunity and poured gasoline on their efforts. So it varies by type.
Yeah, no, understood. And then Marta, I know that we've joked with you before as we were explaining our business model at Biotech Exec, that we suddenly didn't have to explain what a remote working model was, as we're providing talent to these companies, but very much location agnostic. And initially the reaction we got was, well, what do you mean my CFO or my CEO is not going to be based where the lab is? And all of a sudden it's, well, no, they actually bring more value if they're in their local network where they can go and raise funds, where they can go and do this. So, and you've touched on it already, Marta, but how has that changed for you? I guess that's a little bit more of an easier discussion for you to have when describing the services offered by Radius, in that you don't have to kind of get over the initial shock of what the contract research kind of third-party contractor here, and they're not going to be based necessarily down the road where I can go look at them. How has that been for you? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. I was thanking you for the plug, because you very eloquently explained what we do, and that's exactly it, what we just said. It validated the model of virtual teams and of virtual access, because this entire COVID situation just brought to the forefront the ability to gain access to talent and resources at a national scale. Now, Richard mentioned some of our client base is very similar, small to medium-sized biotech. Now, they don't have to be worried that they can't necessarily access talent here in the Southeast locally. They can get a CFO or CEO in Boston or in San Francisco or in Michigan or in Chicago or in Texas, where you're at. So the notion of having a strong virtual team that's going to push these assets forward, and our model where we access on a national level top lab equipment, top lab space, and expertise, it really enables these companies to, in a very protracted timelines with very limited cash, push their drugs forward faster. So that's the positive. I did touch on a little challenge that comes with the overwhelming funding of COVID these days for some of our clients. And it does relate to the fundraising that Richard was talking about. The fact that a lot of our companies have now accessed non-dilutive COVID-focused funding, they're having a challenge with their positioning and their narrative and their focus, especially if they're going out and fundraising on a platform that has been maybe immuno-oncology or just immunology. And now they're throwing in COVID in the mix. and it is not aligned with what their expertise is on the team or what their message has been. And we had an example, this is anecdotal, where a company said, oh, we're pursuing NASH and COVID. And that's their investment pitch. And so there's this kind of clash of, everything's end COVID. So I would caution companies as they're going on to fundraise as to how they're going to position their COVID programs, and if it's even worth mentioning, given that they have access non-dilutive funding. So that's we're still adjusting to that storytelling as much as prioritization of the work and prioritization of the capital to go towards pushing some of these drugs into the clinic.
Great, thank you. That's really insightful. My final question to each of you is going to be open-ended and ask for what you think the future looks like. We've discussed drone delivery of COVID tests to fully remote working models here, and all of that has come about whether due to or by happenstance at the same time as this COVID pandemic has taken a hold of the country and the globe. Will we ever go back to what your regular day looked like in the middle of 2019? And or is there some middle ground that we will, in your opinion, that we will land on once some of these challenges have been overcome, such as the funding inequality between COVID funding on a non-dilutive basis versus the regular funding on the company that you were planning on launching because you have this specific expertise? There has to be some balancing. I don't have the insight to know if we've reached the kind of the end of that bungee and we're going to come back up a little bit, or there's still some more ground to hit, I guess. Richard, would you like to take a first pass at that one?
Sure, I'll take a shot at it. As far as funding and resource spend goes, I think it will come back to some balance. It'll take some time because we're only just beginning to see sort of the first generation of COVID therapies and vaccines and stuff progressing their ways through. We don't know how successful they're going to be. And obviously at some point, there's going to be a second generation that aims for better, right? So it's going to take a little while to work through that. And by little while, I'm thinking, at least 18 months, perhaps more before things come back to a reasonable balance. But it'll get there because some of the people that Marta alluded to who are, we're doing COVID now, even though none of their expertise actually relates to COVID, they're going to find out that they can't compete in that space. And there's a lot of people doing that right now. And it's sort of working right now because of all the attention and all the money that's being thrown at it. But that will rapidly switch as we progress. I think we've already seen that in the behavior of the FDA. In the early few months, they were extremely flexible. And as things progress and they see what works and what doesn't work and what can be a painful decision to make and then renege on later, they're demanding more and more evidence up front, as I would say they should in a lot of cases. So there's that. In terms of the other realities of COVID and working virtually and so on, I think there's a lot of things that are not going to switch back. I think the ability to work remotely, the knowledge that we now have the video capabilities and the internet bandwidth is practically ubiquitous that makes it possible now in a way that it wasn't even possible 5 years ago. I think there's a lot of companies that will completely embrace that. There's some companies that won't, and there'll be a balance there, but it's not going to go back the way it was before. I think we've even seen that on the fronts of really our sales process, right? So we have salespeople in the field. We want to go visit our customers as we're trying to sign a contract for multiple figures of work. Very often they want to come to the site and do an audit and see the equipment. And that has been very difficult in the past few months. So we have adapted by doing virtual tours and virtual audits. So we, for example, created a video-based virtual tour that we can walk people through our equipment and see our space and meet our team virtually in a way that's maybe not quite as good as face-to-face, but it gets you there in 2 or 3 hours instead of sending, 5 people across the country for 3 days to do it. And same thing for audits, where you're looking at the business and you're saying, are they clean? Are they compliant? Do they have the right equipment? We can do that walking around with an iPhone on FaceTime, for example, or on a Zoom call, and answer questions in real time about what's going on in our space, so that people can build the confidence that, yes, we are a real business and we are compliant and we are who we say we are. So that you have to build that relationship to make these kind of deals. I think we're proving that it's possible virtually. It's not as easy perhaps as face to face, but it's getting better, and people are getting more and more used to it. So I think that part is true as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll add just there while it's fresh in my mind. I spent 10 years on the financial statement audit side of life in a global public accounting firm, and left that world prior to COVID. But I've got friends that are still in the industry, and they're telling me about public company, Fortune 100 company inventory stock takes that are happening exactly as you described. So there are thousands and thousands of SKUs being observed and verified via FaceTime, which is kind of, if you took a step back a year, that would just be unheard of.
Yeah.
But everybody in every industry has had to adapt to what can we do to help evidence that this company's real and it has what it's saying it has. So that's great. Marta, how about you next? What does the future look like? And have we seen a seismic change that won't come back?
I think we're seeing some big trends, and Richard alluded to the fact that it's probably, the fact that remote working has proven that we're all working actually more and not less. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but my days are longer. I spend less time commuting and dropping off kids to school and extracting every minute of the day to be productive. And larger corporations will probably notice that and encourage that, and so the positives will stay. Also on the smaller company size front, their OPEX and CAPEX are going down significantly. They don't have to rent a lab space. They don't have to hire scientists necessarily. They can outsource. And so the reliance on CROs and CDMOs, I feel like it's going to continue to increase, which we're hopeful, but it sounds like it's trending that way. And investors will probably take notice if our smaller clients are going fundraising and explain, we're going to be virtual. We're going to manage our CapEx and OpEx to the really tight margins. That's a really attractive proposition. So I feel like those positives will stay and have longer impact. What I'm also hoping on the preclinical development side is that we will find ways that FDA recognizes as more efficient de-risking methodologies. The shortage of non-human primates is showing us how vulnerable the system is and how inefficient it is. And if we can work jointly to identify better models, better animal models, or even ex vivo models to de-risk some of our drugs, to cut costs, shrink timelines, and increase the confidence that the preclinical data will translate well into clinical data, I feel like the industry should be going that way. And I'm hoping that COVID continues to bring that narrative and pressure to the FDA to do that. So we're closely monitoring it, and we're going to be happy once it happens.
Great, thank you for those thoughts, Chuck.
Yeah, I think Richard and Marta have made some really great comments that I would agree with. I think we're going to be in this position for a bit, and it will continue to drive innovation. One of the practical things that I have sort of rolling in my head every time I put a mask on is, how long are we going to be wearing masks? I remember flying through Asian countries years ago, probably going on 10 years ago, and everybody's wearing masks. And I had a mask in my bag, but I didn't even think about pulling it out. I would probably think about that differently. And, there's sort of practical changes to our lives that are, I'm really interested to see how this evolves, frankly, and whether or not we continue to wear masks afterwards. And particularly seeing the incidence of flu and tracking that this year versus years past. Talking to our pediatrician, for example, September, said last year they're just covered in flu cases. This October, they had yet to see the first flu case in their entire patient population. So just really interesting. I'm sure not entirely related to mask wearing, by the way. There are a whole lot of other things that are going on, right? But probably there's some relationship to the mask wearing, and some of the sanitation and things that we're doing more robustly than we may have been doing previously, whether it's washing hands, avoiding families that have been sick anytime in the last however long. So it's just been interesting to see. And I think that will be interesting to see how we think about things in the future. Infectious diseases were such a plague, truly a plague and a scourge for, centuries. And in the last century, mostly before, but somewhat during our lifetime, things have changed radically when it comes to infectious disease research. As Marta mentioned, there's been an incredible slowdown in infectious disease investment, and I think seeing that come back up is really nice to see, because we haven't figured it all out, and this pandemic is a nice reminder of that, a needed and welcome reminder. Maybe not welcome, but needed. So, but in any event, so that's my sort of some of my, I guess, more personal comments, because I don't know that I could say anything that different from what Richard and Marta had already so eloquently said.
Yeah, perfect. So we have, I think, 2.5 minutes left of the session. So for those participants that have been quiet so far, I'll encourage you to ask any questions. I think that you can do that via the chat on Zoom or the chat on Pathable. Elise from Georgia Bio is monitoring those. So any of those questions will hopefully come through to us. But I would just like to thank each of you, Richard, Marta, and Chuck, for your time today. I've found it very interesting hearing your thoughts and getting a little bit of a closer kind of finger on the pulse of what's happening out there in the real world. I think it's important to note that we've all within the industry, specifically you guys, and you're a snapshot of that, adapted so well to be able to try to meet the demand that's come in from COVID, as well as keeping everything else kind of up in the air and not losing traction, so that our progress on other disease indications isn't stunted. I think it's remarkable the work that you guys are doing, and I know that you hear this often, but you should be very proud of that. That's where we are at and what we are trying to achieve. Elise, is there any? Do you see any questions? And if not, I'll spin it around the horn here for 30 seconds in closing remarks. Okay, no questions from Elise. So Richard, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. I just say echo the thoughts of the others on the panel in so many ways. It has been remarkable to see how flexible and adaptable everybody is, and a big shout out to our team at Recro for how well they've pulled together and changed up their lives in so many different ways, and yet still managed to keep our business running, if in better than ever in a lot of senses. So I think this is an opportunity where we're seeing the capabilities of technology and remote work and digital everything, where we have an opportunity to shake things up and look for better efficiencies in our business, which to me has, in the pharma side of the business, it has perhaps due to regulation, perhaps due to inertia, has stayed in the past in a lot of ways with respect to technology and the things that are possible now. So I'm hopeful that we continue to see adaptation, flexibility, and really gain some efficiencies. Like Marta said, being able to get access to expertise anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world as part of your team, without having to think about relocating them and find an office space for them and all that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Is really remarkable.
No, I agree. Marta, any closing thoughts?
I feel optimistic about the future. And it sounds like everybody on this panel is open for business. COVID hasn't slowed us down. We adapted. That's a part of evolution. So we're going to grow.
Yeah, perfect. Chuck, I'll leave the last words to you, and then I'll close the call after that.
Yeah, thanks. No, I'd echo Marta's comment. I mean, I'm really optimistic, very happy to be here in the United States. I mean, the innovation that has been demonstrated over the last 6 to 8 months through the pandemic have really been remarkable, unparalleled, and really great to see that industry really bringing that innovation to us in a really shortened and compressed timeline has been something to see. I'm very optimistic. A big, really been amazing to be a part of watching a large organization like Quest bring as many diagnostic products to market as they've needed to, just to try to keep up with demand over the last many months. It's really something to see, and taken an extraordinary amount of effort from everyone. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again to each of you for your time today, and thank you to all of the participants. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and we'll speak to you soon.
Yep, thanks.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
everyone.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.